We've all been there. You wake in a cold sweat, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against your ribs, the terrifying image of a nightmare still burned behind your eyelids. It's more than just a bad dream. It's a gut feeling, a chilling conviction that what you just saw was not a random jumble of anxieties, but a genuine premonition, a warning. What if those unsettling nighttime visions aren't random at all? What if your subconscious is sending you a crucial, sometimes life-saving signal about the future? We believe time is an arrow, fired from the past and disappearing into an unwritten fog. But what if the future isn't a blank page, but a landscape that already exists, hidden just over the horizon? From the soot-stained valleys of 1966 Wales, where children dreamt of a black mountain burying their school before the earth ever moved, to the high-tech labs of the 21st century, we explore the chilling evidence that the linear march of time is an illusion. Through the secret files of the British Premonitions Bureau and the mind-bending physics of retrocausality, we ask if the human brain is a biological periscope peering into a block universe where every moment exists simultaneously. We'll investigate the spidey sense measured in modern experiments, where the body physically reacts to emotional shocks seconds before they strike, and trace this mystery back to the sacred dream temples of the ancient world. The evidence suggests we are not just passengers on the train of time, we are creatures of the Everywhen. So tonight, when you turn off the lights and drift into the dark temple of sleep, pay attention. You might just be remembering the future. The rain had been falling for weeks, not a storm, but a cold, persistent grey drumming that seemed to have settled permanently over the valleys of South Wales. It was October 1966. In the small, coal-mining village of Everywhen, the water didn't just wash the streets, it soaked into the very bones of the landscape. And above the village, looming like a dark, man-made thunderhead, sat the waste of the industry that both fed them and ultimately killed them. Coal. This was the Merthyr Vale colliery. For years they had been dumping their spoil, the useless black slurry left over from mining, on the slopes of Mynyd Merthyr. They called it Tip Number 7. It was a mountain of unstable debris, now fatally swollen with the relentless autumn rain, resting precariously on a hidden bed of sandstone and natural springs. To the geologists and engineers who had once worried over it, it was a physics problem waiting for a catastrophic solution. To the villagers below, it was simply a shadow, a part of the scenery. But to a select few, sensitive souls tuned to a frequency the rest of us instinctively ignore, it was something else entirely. A broadcasting station of pure, impending doom. The date is October 20th, 1966. A Thursday. Inside a small terrace house down the road from the Pantglas Junior School, a 10-year-old girl named Errol Mai Jones wakes up from her sleep. Errol Mai was not the kind of child given to flights of fancy. She was a coal miner's daughter, pragmatic, grounded, and described by those who knew her as not given to imagination. But this morning, the thin barrier between her sleeping mind and her waking reality had dissolved. She finds her mother, Megan, in the kitchen. The air is thick with the smell of damp wool and brewing tea. Errol Mai insists on speaking, an uncharacteristic urgency in her small, clear voice. "Mummy," she says, "I dreamt I went to school, and there was no school there. Something black had come down all over it." Her mother, distracted by the morning rush, the clatter of pans, and the relentless schedule of a working life, brushes it off. It was just a nightmare, an unsettling image born of a child's busy brain. "Don't be silly," she says, perhaps handing her a piece of toast. "Eat your breakfast." Errol Mai goes to school, but she was not the only one in Aberfan listening to the static of the future. A few streets away, an 8-year-old boy named Paul Davies is sitting with his sketchbook. He is agitated. He cannot articulate the cold dread that has settled in his stomach, so he does the only thing a child knows how to do. He draws it. He sketches figures, small, desperate stick men, digging frantically into a hillside. They are writhing, struggling against the suffocating earth. Beneath the drawing, in the uneven, heavy-handed scrawl of a child, he writes 2 words: not help, not mining. He writes, "The end." The night passes. The rain continues its relentless drumming. The morning of October 21st breaks, grey and wet. At 7:30 a.m, the men working on the very top of tip number 7 notice the rails they use to transport the waste have kinked. The ground is moving. The mountain is waking up. They have no phone to warn the village below. They can only watch. At 9:15 a.m, the physics problem finds its solution. A saturated section of the tip liquefies. It transforms from solid rock into a thixotropic wave, a black tsunami of slurry moving at an impossible 80 miles per hour. It roars down the mountainside, snapping huge trees like matchsticks, tearing through 2 farm cottages and smashing directly into the Pantglass Junior School. The roar is deafening, like a low-flying jet, and then, suddenly, there is only silence. A thick, suffocating silence. 116 children die that morning. 28 adults die with them. Errol Mai Jones is among the dead. Paul Davies is among the dead. The school, just as Errol Mai had seen in the theatre of her sleep, is gone. Something black had come down all over it. The warning had come. It had been ignored. The future, for those 144 people, was not a blank page. It was a tragedy that had already been written. Disasters are loud. They tear through reality with noise and violence, the screech of metal, the roar of earth, the screams of the dying. But in the aftermath of Aberfan, amidst the stunned silence of a grieving nation, a different kind of noise began to emerge. A whisper from the collective unconscious. A signal that had been broadcast before the transmitter was even turned on. Dr. John Barker was a psychiatrist with a peculiar, almost obsessive curiosity. He worked at Shelton Hospital in Shrewsbury, a place of Victorian gloom, red brick, and high windows. But his mind was occupied with the farthest edges of human experience. He was a man of science, a member of the venerable Society for Psychical Research, but he was not a mystic in the traditional sense. He wasn't looking for ghosts or table-rapping spirits. He was looking for data. He was looking for proof. Barker had long been fascinated by the idea of scared to death, the psychosomatic power of the mind to simply shut down the body. But when he heard the reports coming out of Aberfan, the devastating stories of Errol Mai Jones, the boy Paul Davies, and others, he didn't dismiss them as grief-stricken hindsights or the retrofitting of memory after the fact. He saw a pattern emerging. He wondered, if a disaster of this magnitude sends shockwaves through the Earth, does it also send shockwaves through time? Barker did something unprecedented in the history of psychiatry. He didn't write a paper for a dusty academic journal. He contacted Peter Fairley, the respected science editor of the Evening Standard, one of London's biggest newspapers. Together, they launched a national experiment, a massive public query designed to catch the impossible in a bureaucratic net. On January 4th, 1967, they asked the British public a simple, chilling question. Did you dream of Everywhen before it happened? The response was overwhelming. It was the moment that marked the birth of the British Premonitions Bureau. It sounds like pure fiction. A government-sponsored bureau dedicated to collecting nightmares, straight out of a Philip K. Dick novel or a forgotten episode of The X-Files. But it was a rigorous, bureaucratic attempt to scientifically capture the future. Barker wasn't interested in vague horoscopes or feelings of unease. He wanted timestamps. He wanted written records. He wanted proof, verifiable proof, that the information existed before the event took place. He received 76 letters. Barker sat in his office at Shelton Hospital, sifting through the correspondence. He applied a ruthless scientific filter. He threw out the vague ones. I felt something bad would happen. He threw out the ones that couldn't be verified by a third party. He threw out the ones that seemed like post-traumatic rationalizations, the mind trying to impose order on chaos after the fact. He was left with a core of cases that absolutely defied logical explanation. Take Kathleen Middleton. She was a mild-mannered music and piano teacher living in North London, hundreds of miles from the coal tips and the Welsh valleys. She had no connection to the mining industry. She led a quiet, suburban life. Yet, on the morning of the disaster, October 21st, at roughly 6 a.m., 3 full hours before the landslide began its deadly descent, she woke up, choking. She gasped for air, absolutely terrified, clutching her own throat. She told her family she felt the walls were literally caving in on her. The sensation of suffocation was physical, visceral, and terrifyingly real. She wrote it down. She stamped the time. Barker began to realize that these people were acting like human seismographs. They were picking up tremors before the earthquake hit. The disaster at Everywhen had created a psychic footprint so heavy that it had indented the timeline hours, days, even weeks before the physical rock actually moved. But the Bureau wasn't just about cataloguing the past. Barker wanted to know if they could stop the next one. For 18 tense months, the Bureau operated as a kind of national radar station for catastrophe. They tracked the nightmares of the nation. Middleton and another percipient, the term Barker used for his subjects, a post office worker named Alan Hensher, began to file reports of plane crashes and train wrecks with unnerving accuracy. They quickly became the Bureau's star witnesses. In 1967, Hensher telephoned the Bureau's hotline. He was agitated, his voice clearly stressed. He warned of an impending plane crash, and he was specific, almost clinically so. I'm looking for a crash over mountains, he said. 123 or 124 people will die. It is a terrifyingly specific number. Not many, not hundreds. 123 or 124. Weeks later, a Britannia Airways flight, a Bristol Britannia 312, attempted to land in Nicosia, Cyprus, during a fierce thunderstorm. It crashed into the mountains. The death toll? 126. Hensher missed the count by 2 souls, a numerical near miss that is statistically harder to achieve by pure chance than getting the number wildly wrong. Dr. John Barker began to realize that the Bureau wasn't just observing history. He and his small staff were becoming dangerously entangled with it. The ultimate test of the Bureau came when its star percipients turned their prophetic gaze toward Barker himself. Kathleen Middleton sent him a final, stark warning. She had a vision of Barker, and she was terrified for him. She saw a crossed-out calendar. She saw an end. She saw his end. Barker, the man who studied death, who even wrote a book titled Scared to Death, was now the subject of the prophecy. He brushed it off, perhaps with the nervous, hollow laughter of a man who suddenly knows too much. But the stress of running the Bureau, the weight of filtering 1,000 dark premonitions, and the constant psychological toll of staring into the abyss of the future took its toll. Dr. John Barker died of a brain hemorrhage shortly after receiving Middleton's warnings. He was only 42 years old. The man who tried to map the future became, in a final, cruel irony, a casualty of it. The Premonitions Bureau eventually closed. Its files were archived, gathering dust in obscure corners of parapsychology archives, its story fading into the obscure corners of history. Critics, skeptics, and statisticians will say that this is all just the cold, hard logic of the law of large numbers. They argue, and it is a powerful argument. Millions of people dream every night. If 50 million people have a nightmare about a plane crash, and a plane actually crashes the next day, those few thousand people who got it right will think they are prophets. The other 49 million will forget their dream by breakfast. It is a statistical inevitability. And they are right. To a degree, that explanation holds sway. But that logical, clinical explanation feels hollow when you look at the granular details of the cases. Errol Mai Jones didn't just dream of bad things. She dreamt of school. She dreamt of something black coming down all over it. She dreamt it was gone. Paul Davies drew digging figures and wrote "The End." Kathleen Middleton felt the visceral, crushing sensation of suffocation and walls caving in. The sheer specificity is the fingerprint of the true phenomenon. It is not a shotgun blast of random guesses. It is a sniper shot of high-resolution information. We are left with a profoundly disturbing possibility. The tragedy at Aberfan was not a surprise. It was broadcast. We just didn't have the receiver turned on. Or rather, the receivers were turned on, in the minds of children and piano teachers. But we, as a society, didn't know how to listen. We didn't have the language or the scientific framework to translate the signal. To understand how a child can see a catastrophic landslide 2 weeks before it happens, we have to leave the comfortable realm of psychology and enter the strange, counterintuitive, and frankly terrifying world of physics. We have to ask the question that has haunted philosophers and scientists since the beginning of thought. What exactly is time? If you ask a physicist about time, they might tell you something that sounds like absolute madness to the rest of us. They might tell you that the very flow of time, the persistent, convincing feeling that you are moving from yesterday to today to tomorrow, is in fact a persistent, convincing illusion. Albert Einstein, the father of modern physics, famously wrote in a letter to the family of his deceased friend, Michel Besso, "For us believing physicists, the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion." He wasn't being poetic. He was being literal. This is the theory of the block universe, also known as eternalism. Imagine a simple loaf of bread. The past is the heel we've already eaten. The present is the slice we are chewing on now. The future is the rest of the loaf, waiting in the bag. In our common, everyday perception, the future doesn't exist yet. It is unbaked dough, an absolute blank slate. But in the block universe, the loaf is already baked. The death of the sun, your next birthday, and the fall of the Roman Empire all exist simultaneously in a massive, fixed, four-dimensional block of space-time. Now is simply a spotlight moving across the surface of the block, illuminating one slice at a time. If the future already exists, if it is sitting there, as real and physically present as the chair you are sitting on, then information from the future is physically available. It is data stored on the hard drive of the universe. The only problem is that we are programmed by both physics and biology to read the data in only one direction. But is that programming absolute? Or is it merely a deep-seated habit? The skeptic at this point will pound the table and state the absolute law. Effect cannot precede cause. You cannot have the footprint before the boot steps in the mud. You cannot have the echo before the shout. But in the subatomic world, the strange, counterintuitive basement of reality, where the rules of common sense simply do not apply, the arrow of time is not so rigid. In fact, on the quantum scale, it is almost entirely reversible. The fundamental equations of physics, for the most part, work just as well backward as they do forward. Consider the double slit experiment, arguably the most famous and mind-bending magic trick in all of physics. When we fire particles like photons, packets of light, at a barrier with two tiny slits, they behave like waves, spreading out and creating an interference pattern on the wall behind them. They seem to go through both slits at once. They are in a bizarre, indeterminate state of superposition. But, and this is the crucial, unsettling part, if we put a detector, an observer, at the slits to see which one the particle actually goes through, the wave function instantly collapses. The particle immediately snaps into existence and behaves like a tiny bullet, going through just one slit. The act of observation itself changes reality. That's strange enough on its own, but it gets much, much stranger. Physicists developed a variation on this experiment called the delayed choice quantum eraser. It is a complex setup involving entangled photons, prisms, and high-tech detectors. But here is the simplified version that keeps theoretical physicists up at night. Imagine you are playing a game of coin toss with a friend. You flip a coin, catch it, and cover it with your hand. You don't look at it yet. In our normal Newtonian world, the result is fixed. It's either heads or tails. You just don't know which. But in the quantum world, under the conditions of the delayed choice experiment, the coin is effectively spinning in a state of both heads and tails until you finally look at it. Now, imagine your friend is also flipping a coin, one that is quantum entangled with yours. The delayed choice experiment suggests that a decision made now, say, to measure or not measure the friend's coin, can literally determine the outcome of a coin flip that happened in the past. It is as if the particle, flying through the air, knows what you are going to do in the future and instantly adjusts its past behavior to match. If you are going to look at it, it behaves like a particle. If you are not going to look, it behaves like a wave. The future choice dictates the past history. This is retrocausality. The future is influencing the past. The implications are staggering for our common sense understanding of reality. It suggests that time is not a one-way street. It is a two-way fiber optic cable. Information can and does flow downstream from the past, but under the right, rare conditions, a trickle of information can flow upstream from the future. Skeptics will quickly argue that this only applies to the bizarre world of subatomic particles, photons and electrons, not to massive, warm, messy things like buses, landslides or lottery numbers. They correctly state that quantum effects decohere or wash out when you get to the scale of human brains. But are we absolutely sure? Some physicists and parapsychologists, like Dr. Eric Wargo, author of the seminal book Time Loops, argue that we are looking at this all the wrong way. They suggest that time loops are a fundamental, built-in part of our reality, and that biology might have evolved to take advantage of these subtle loops. Think about it from a harsh, evolutionary perspective. Nature is a ruthless optimizer. If there is a physical mechanism, however faint or difficult to detect, that allows information to leak from the future, biology would inevitably find a way to exploit it. Imagine two gazelles on the African savanna. Gazelle A relies only on sight and hearing. It sees the lion only when the lion actually jumps. Gazelle B has a random genetic mutation, a quantum-sensitive structure in its brain, perhaps in the microtubules, as some theories suggest, that can pick up the shock wave of the lion's attack 0.5 seconds before it happens via a subtle retrocausality effect. Gazelle B jumps before the lion strikes. Gazelle B survives. Gazelle B passes on its genes. Over millions of years, this sensitivity is refined and becomes instinct. Perhaps that is what the brain is, in part. Not just a library of the past, but a periscope peering into the future. Perhaps gut instinct is nothing more than low-resolution precognition. And perhaps dreams are the high-bandwidth channel, opened only when the deafening noise of the senses is finally silenced. If the physics allows for time to flow backward, then the next inevitable question is, does the biology use it? If we accept the theoretical possibility that the universe might leak information backward, do we, the receivers, have the equipment to pick it up? Is there a radio transmitter and receiver built into the grey matter of the human brain, permanently tuned to the station of tomorrow? Enter the lab of Dr. Darrell Bem at Cornell University. Bem is not a fringe researcher in a darkened basement. He is a giant in the field of social psychology, a highly respected figure. In 2011, he published a paper in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology that didn't just challenge the scientific establishment, it shook its very foundations. It was titled, "Feeling the Future: Experimental Evidence for Anomalous Retroactive Influences on Cognition and Affect." Bem's methods were audacious in their simplicity. He took classic psychological experiments, standard tests that had been used for decades, and he simply flipped the timeline, reversing cause and effect. In a standard memory test, you study a list of words, and then you are tested on them. You remember the words you studied better than the ones you didn't. That's obvious. Practice helps memory. Cause leads to effect. Bem reversed it entirely. He gave his students a test on a list of words first. They had to type out as many words as they could remember from a master list they had barely glanced at. Then, after the test was completely finished and their answers logged, the computer randomly selected a subset of those same words for the students to study for practice. The results were, scientifically, impossible. The students performed significantly better on the words they would study in the future. It was as if the act of studying tomorrow rippled backward in time to subtly help them pass the test today. This phenomenon is called retroactive facilitation of recall. The future practice wired the brain in the past. But Bem didn't stop there. He also tested presentiment, the ability to physically feel the future, the spidey sense. In this experiment, subjects sat before a computer screen with two digital curtains. Behind one curtain was a blank wall. Behind the other was a highly engaging, emotionally charged image. The subject simply had to click on the curtain where they thought the image was hiding. The computer didn't decide where the image was until after the subject clicked their choice. This is a crucial detail. There was no way to know the answer, because the answer simply didn't exist yet. It was a true random number generator operating in the future. When the hidden image was neutral, a simple basket of fruit, a landscape, the subjects guessed right exactly 50% of the time. Pure chance, the expected outcome. But when the image was highly erotic, pornographic, or highly emotionally charged, something strange happened. The subjects guessed right 53.1% of the time. 3.1%. It sounds like nothing. A mere rounding error, a number a casual observer would dismiss. But in the world of statistics, over thousands of trials, a 3.1% deviation is a mountain. The odds of this happening by pure random chance are literally billions to one. It suggests that the sheer emotional shock of seeing the image travels backward in time to the moment of choice. We feel the future before it happens, especially when that future is dangerous, sexy, or violent. The brain pays acute attention to high-stakes data, even if that data is arriving from the wrong direction in time. This aligns perfectly with the work of other researchers, like Julia Mossbridge at Northwestern University and Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. They rigorously study what they call predictive anticipatory activity, PAA. In their labs, they hook people up to highly sensitive skin conductance monitors, which measure minute amounts of sweating, and heart rate monitors. They show them a random, unpredictable series of images. Calm, 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 violent, calm, calm, erotic, calm. The resulting data is consistent and profoundly unsettling. The body physically reacts, sweating increases, heart rate rises, seconds before the violent or erotic image appears on the screen. The conscious mind doesn't know. The subject is not sitting there saying, "I think a gun is coming." But the body knows. The autonomic nervous system is bracing for impact. It is the spidey sense made visible on a graph. The body, in some deep, lizard brain part of itself, is living a few seconds in the future. Skeptics, of course, attacked Bem's work with the ferocity of a swarm. They cited p-hacking, a manipulation of datasets, and the failure of some labs to replicate the results under specific conditions. It was an event that sparked a full-blown replication crisis in psychology. But a comprehensive 2015 meta-analysis of 90 replications from 33 laboratories in 14 countries still found a small but significant effect, particularly for the erotic stimuli tests. The anomaly, the flicker of the future, absolutely refuses to go away. But how? How, on a biological level, does the brain do this? Neuroscience offers a possible mechanism, though not necessarily a paranormal one. It is called the constructive episodic simulation hypothesis. We used to think memory was like a perfect video file stored on a hard drive. You hit play, and you watch the past exactly as it happened. We now know that this is entirely wrong. Memory is an active, subjective act of creation and reconstruction. When you remember your 10th birthday, your brain reassembles the sensory data, the smell of the cake, the colour of the balloons, the sound of the laughter, into a new simulation every time you recall it. Crucially, the brain uses the exact same neural network, the default mode network, to imagine the future. When you plan your weekend, you are using the same hardware you use for memory. You are taking the Lego bricks of the past and building a detailed model of the future. The default mode network is, in essence, a time machine. It is constantly churning through past data to simulate thousands of possible futures. It runs thousands of scenarios a day. The skeptic says, quite reasonably, precognition is just a simulation that got lucky. You simulate 1,000 disasters. One happens. You call it a prophecy. You simply forget the 999 times you were wrong. This is the coincidence argument, and it is a powerful one. But the believer, or the researcher interested in the impossible, asks a more provocative question. If the brain is a simulation engine, and we live in a block universe where the future information is physically available, is it possible that our simulations sometimes accidentally download the actual pre-existing data? Is the imagination simply the organ we use to perceive the elsewhere of time? When Errol Mai Jones imagined the blackness over her school, was she simply constructing a simulation from generalized fear, or was she in a moment of quantum clarity, remembering a future that was already set in stone? Long before we had fMRI machines, before we had quantum mechanics, and long before we had the scientific method, we had the snake and the dark room. If you were sick in ancient Greece, physically ill with a tumor, or spiritually lost with a madness you couldn't name, you didn't go to a hospital. You didn't see a doctor in a white coat and stethoscope. You travelled to the great healing sanctuaries like Epidaurus, or Kos, or Pergamon. You went to the Asclepieion, the temple of the healer god Asclepius. Asclepius was the son of Apollo, the god of light and reason, but his domain was the dark. His symbol was the serpent-entwined staff, a powerful symbol which we still use on every ambulance and medical insignia today. The treatment was a ritual known as incubation, enkoimesis. It wasn't just sleeping. It was a deliberate technology of consciousness, a calibrated multi-day process designed to break the barrier between the noisy, waking self and the divine, predictive knowledge of the dream. The journey began with catharsis, purification. You would fast for days. You would bathe in cold, sacred springs. You would abstain from sex and alcohol. You were literally stripping away the noise of the biological machine. You offered sacrifices, honey cakes, roosters, to appease the gods and prepare your vessel. Then, at nightfall, you entered the abaton, the sleeping hall. It was a long colonnaded corridor, open to the air but shrouded in shadow. You lay down on a klein, a couch, from which we get the word clinic. And you were not alone. The temple priests released the hounds of the god, the Aesculapian snakes. These were large, non-venomous rat snakes, Zaminis longissimus. They would slither across the cool stone floor. They would glide over your sleeping body. Sometimes they would even lick your wounds. The sound of their scales on the stone was the hypnotic, natural white noise of the ancient world. The belief was simple and direct. The god would come to you in the dream. He would appear as a kindly old man, or a snake, or a dog. He would either cure you instantly, a miracle, or more commonly, he would give you a prescription. He would tell you to eat a certain herb, to run barefoot at dawn, or to write a poem. This wasn't some fringe magic practiced by charlatans. This was the established healthcare system of the entire Mediterranean for over 1,000 years. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king, was a great devotee of Asclepius. And the hundreds of votive tablets left behind, stone carvings of healed eyes, limbs and organs, testify that something was happening in those dark halls that modern science cannot fully explain. Was it the placebo effect? Almost certainly, in many cases, yes. But the Greeks understood something profound that we have largely forgotten. The dream state is a diagnostic tool. The sleeping mind can access information about the body. the subtle rumblings of a cancerous growth, the silent stress on the heart, that the loud, distracted, waking mind simply ignores. The god in the dream telling you to stop drinking wine is not a deity. It is your own liver screaming for help, using the powerful avatar of Asclepius to get your attention past the conscious defenses. The vision of a future illness is the body's subtle signaling system, amplified by the sensory deprivation of the abaton. Across the Mediterranean, the Egyptians were equally obsessed with the hidden data of the night. They built the first systematic databases of dreams. The Egyptian dream books, like the famous Papyrus Chester Beatty III, dating to around 1275 BC, are vast catalogues of if/then logic, treating dreams as a complex code to be cracked. If a man sees himself looking in a mirror, bad, it means another wife. If a man sees himself eating crocodile flesh, good, it means becoming an official. If a man sees himself drinking warm beer, bad, it means suffering. They relied heavily on punning and opposites. The dream was viewed as a riddle posed by the gods or demons. To solve the future, you had to meticulously decode the language of the night. They didn't view time as a straight line either. They saw the dream world, the duat, as a parallel realm where the dead, the gods, and the future mingled together. To sleep was, quite literally, to enter the lobby of eternity. We dismiss these ancient practices as mere superstitions. We smile at the idea of sleeping with non-venomous snakes, but look at the core idea, stripped of the ritual. To know the future, you must shut down the sensory input of the present. You must incubate. You must turn off the lights of the noisy house so you can finally see the stars through the window. If the ancient Greeks used dreams to fix the body, the Tibetan Buddhists, in the high, thin air of the Himalayas, use them to escape it entirely. For centuries, monks of the Bon and Nyingma traditions have practiced dream yoga, milam. To the Western mind, this looks like lucid dreaming, the ability to know you are dreaming while you are asleep. We typically use lucid dreaming for entertainment, to fly, to fulfill fantasies, or to problem solve. The Tibetans use it for a much higher purpose: rehearsal. The ultimate, final rehearsal for death. They believe that when we die, our consciousness enters the bardo, an intermediate hallucinatory state of reality that exists between death and rebirth. The bardo is a dreamscape, but it is volatile, unstable, and terrifying. The winds of karma blow you around like a feather in a storm. Terrifying visions arise. If you are not prepared, you get distracted, you get scared, and you are sucked back into the cycle of suffering and involuntary rebirth. Dream yoga is the training ground for navigating the transition of death. The logic is impeccable. If you can wake up in a dream, if you can realize that the monster chasing you is merely a projection of your own mind, then you can do the same when you die. You can control the bardo. You can choose your future. You can attain liberation. The practice is rigorous. It is not for the casual sleeper or the weekend meditator. It begins before sleep. The practitioner resolves, with fierce concentration, to maintain awareness. As they drift off, they visualize a red lotus in the throat chakra. In the very center of the lotus, they visualize a small, luminous white Tibetan letter, R. They focus on this R as the body shuts down. The senses fade. The limbs go heavy. But the mind watches the R. The goal is to cross the threshold of sleep without ever losing consciousness. If successful, they enter the dream with full lucidity. They immediately practice changing the dreamscape. They turn fire into water. They multiply objects. They fly. This is not for fun. It is to prove to the mind, on the deepest level, that matter is pliable. That reality is a construct. But the ultimate goal is not to have fun dreams. The ultimate goal is to dissolve the dream entirely, to banish the images, the stories, the landscapes, and to rest in the clear light of pure, objectless consciousness. It is a profound inversion of our Western view. We think the waking world is real and the dream world is fake. The dream yogi says, no, the waking world is just a denser, stickier, more persistent dream. Both are ultimately illusions. The only thing that is truly real is the pure awareness that watches both. And if we look even further back, to the oldest continuous culture on Earth, we find a view of time that makes the block universe look simple, almost naive. The Aboriginal Australians of the land now known as Australia do not speak of the dream time as a past event. That is a mistranslation by early, confused anthropologists. The anthropologist W.E.H. Stanner coined a better, more accurate term, the Everywhen. For the Aboriginal people, the ancestors, giant, powerful beings like the rainbow serpent, didn't create the world and then leave it. They travelled the land, singing the world into existence, leaving tracks that became the rivers and the mountains. And then they sank back into the earth. They are still there. The creation is not finished. It is happening now. The past, present, and future are stacked vertically on top of each other in the landscape. When an Aboriginal person walks a songline, they are not just remembering history. They are synchronizing their present stride with the eternal footfalls of the ancestors. They are walking in the Everywhen. In this powerful worldview, precognition is not a strange superpower. It is not an anomaly of physics. It is just looking sideways. If you are standing in the Everywhen, the future is just another part of the landscape. It is over there, behind that hill. You don't need a theoretical time machine to see it. You just need to know the song. But there is a danger here, a jagged, terrible danger that we must address. If we accept the possibility that dreams can be warnings, we open a door, and through that door, monsters can and will enter. The human mind is a pattern-seeking machine, and it craves meaning. We want to believe that the random firing of neurons is a profound message from God, the universe, or the deep past. But the overwhelming majority of every dream is simply garbage, the brain taking out the trash. The static of generalized anxiety, the digestion of a heavy meal, the simple, random synthesis of old memories. They are not prophecies, they are just housekeeping. The danger lies in apophenia, the powerful, often uncontrollable tendency to see meaningful patterns where none actually exist. And when that tendency metastasizes, it becomes the foundation for psychosis. Consider the chilling case of Hong Xiuquan. In 1837, Hong was a young man in China. He was brilliant and ambitious. He wanted to be a scholar and a bureaucrat. He took the Imperial Civil Service exams, the golden ticket to a good life. He failed. He tried again. He failed again. The shame and pressure broke him. He fell into a severe nervous breakdown. He lay in bed for days, delirious with a high fever. And in that fever, he had a vivid, transformative dream. He saw a golden, bearded man who gave him a mighty sword and told him to slay the demons of the world. He saw a younger man who called him brother. He saw visions of fierce battle and glory. When he woke up, he didn't seek a doctor or a psychiatrist. He found a Christian pamphlet, good words to admonish the age. He read about God and Jesus Christ, and his desperate mind, craving meaning and order, connected the dots. The golden man was God the Father. The younger man was Jesus. Therefore, he, Hong Xiuquan, was the younger brother of Jesus Christ. He wasn't insane, he decided. He was a prophet, a revolutionary chosen by heaven itself. He began to preach his divine revelation. He founded the God-worshipping society. He gathered followers, disaffected peasants, charcoal burners, the poor and the angry. The movement grew like a flash fire. It became a powerful army. It became the Taiping Rebellion. Hong Xiuquan declared war on the reigning Qing dynasty to slay the demons, the Manchus. He established the heavenly kingdom of great peace in the city of Nanjing. It was not peaceful. It was one of the bloodiest conflicts in all of human history. It lasted 14 years. It ravaged 17 provinces of China. The final death toll is estimated conservatively between 20 and 30 million people. 20 million dead because one man had a fever dream and refused to call it a nightmare. Or consider a more intimate, modern, and profoundly tragic example. The case of Brian Thomas. In July 2008, Brian and his wife Christine were on a peaceful holiday in a camper van in West Wales. They were a happy couple, married for 40 years. But Brian suffered from night terrors, a severe sleep disorder where the brain remains asleep, but the body becomes active, fleeing from terrified hallucinatory visions. One night in the confined space of the van, Brian dreamt that a boy racer, one of the youths who had been making noise in the car park earlier, had broken into the vehicle. In the dream, the intruder landed on top of Christine. Brian fought him with every ounce of his strength. He wrestled the intruder, choking him, protecting his beloved wife. He woke up to the sound of his own terrified screams and found his hands around Christine's throat. She was dead. He had strangled the love of his life in his sleep, believing he was saving her. He immediately called the police, sobbing and hysterical. "I thought I was fighting a lad," he told them repeatedly. The courts eventually acquitted him of murder, ruling it a rare case of sane automatism. He was not a murderer. He was a sleeper who acted out a psychotic dream. But the horror remains. The dream was real to him, but the reality was death. And then there is the danger of the legal system seizing on the prophetic narrative, the case of Stephen Linscott. In 1980, a nursing student named Karen Ann Phillips was brutally murdered in Oak Park, Illinois. Stephen Linscott, a Bible student living next door, had a vivid dream. He dreamt of a man beating a woman to death with a tire iron. He thought he was helping the investigation. He went to the police precinct. He told them about his dream, thinking it might be a subtle psychic lead they could follow. The police didn't see a psychic. They saw a confession. They interrogated him relentlessly. They twisted the vague details of his dream to match the known crime scene. They argued that only the killer could know these details. Details Linscott had either guessed or that were common sense. Linscott was convicted of murder. He spent years in prison before DNA evidence finally exonerated him. His nightmare didn't solve a crime. It tragically created a new victim. This is the precipice we stand on. For every Errol Mai Jones who correctly predicts a landslide, there is a Hong Xiuquan who hallucinates a holy war that kills millions. For every warning that might save a life, there is a delusion that destroys one. The line between precognitive anticipatory activity, the scientific term for feeling the future, and schizophrenic delusion is terrifyingly thin. Both involve the blurring of boundaries between internal and external reality, between past and future. The mystic swims in the same deep water where the psychotic tragically drowns. History, it seems, loves a rhyme. It loves to echo its greatest tragedies. Before we conclude our journey, we must look at two final, profoundly unsettling cases that sit uncomfortably between folklore, mass tragedy, and statistical impossibility. The first takes us to Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The year is 1967. The same year, the British Premonitions Bureau opened its doors halfway across the world. For 13 months, this small, isolated town was plagued by what locals described as high strangeness. Residents reported persistent sightings of a creature, a grey, winged humanoid with terrifying, glowing red eyes. The newspapers quickly dubbed it the Mothman. Couples parked in the TNT area, an abandoned munitions dump, claimed the creature chased their cars at speeds of 100 miles per hour. Dogs disappeared. Poltergeist activity was reported in homes. The entire town was on a razor's edge of mass hysteria. Then came the dreams. Mary Hire, a local reporter for the Athens Messenger, began to have a relentless, recurring nightmare. In her dream, she saw visitors to the town drowning in the river. Crucially, she saw Christmas packages, brightly wrapped gifts, floating in the dark, cold water. Other residents reported similar dark visions, dreams of twisting metal, dreams of mass screams, dreams of the river. On December 15th, 1967, at 5 p.m., the Silver Bridge, a massive suspension bridge connecting Point Pleasant to Gallipolis, Ohio, suffered a catastrophic collapse. It was the peak of rush hour. The bridge was packed with holiday shoppers and commuters. A single eye-bar in the suspension chain failed due to stress corrosion cracking, an invisible weakness. The entire bridge folded like a deck of cards and plunged into the frigid Ohio River. 46 people died. When the rescuers arrived on the scene, shining their powerful searchlights into the freezing black water, they saw exactly what Mary Hire had dreamt. Cars were submerged, bodies were lost, and floating tragically on the surface of the black water were dozens of brightly wrapped Christmas presents, bobbing in the freezing current. After the bridge fell, the Mothman was never seen again. Was the creature a literal warning? Was the mass hysteria a profound physical symptom of the coming structural stress? Or did the collective anxiety of a town, sensing the structural weakness of the bridge on a subconscious level, simply manifest a monster? A tulpa, a thought form brought to life by shared, agonizing fear? The question remains unanswered. And finally, we look to the most famous, most unsinkable disaster of the 20th century, the sinking of the Titanic. We all know the story of the maiden voyage. But do you know the story of W.T. Stead? Stead was a legendary investigative journalist in Victorian England, the father of the modern tabloid, and a powerful public figure. He was also an ardent spiritualist and fascinated by the occult. In 1886, he wrote a chilling fictional story titled How the Mail Steamer Went Down in Mid-Atlantic by a Survivor. It was a stark, cautionary tale about a passenger ship that sinks with a massive loss of life because, unbelievably, it doesn't have enough lifeboats for all its passengers. In 1892, he wrote another story, From the Old World to the New. In this one, a ship sinks after hitting an iceberg in the North Atlantic. The name of the ship in the story? The Majestic. The captain comes to the rescue of survivors. 20 years later, in April 1912, W.T. Stead, who had made a fortune on his prophetic-seeming journalism, boarded the RMS Titanic for a trip to America. When the ship struck the iceberg, Stead didn't panic or rush to the lifeboats. He went to the smoking room. He sat down in a leather chair. He began to read a book. He was last seen there, calm and resigned, as the freezing water rose around him. He died in the exact scenario he had written about twice. He had predicted the specific cause, iceberg, the precise consequence, lack of lifeboats, and the general location, North Atlantic. He had effectively written his own obituary 20 years in advance. Mark Twain, the great American humorist, also claimed a similar agonizing experience. In 1858, while working as a steamboat pilot on the Mississippi River, he had a vivid, visceral dream. He saw his younger brother Henry lying in a metal coffin. The coffin was resting on 2 chairs. On Henry's chest was a bouquet of white flowers with a single red rose in the very centre. Weeks later, the steamboat Pennsylvania, on which Henry was working, exploded due to a boiler malfunction. Henry was badly burned. He died days later. When Twain went to see the body, he found Henry laid out in a metal coffin, an unusual and expensive choice paid for by local ladies because of Henry's youth. It was resting, exactly as in the dream, on 2 chairs. And as Twain stood there shaking with grief, an elderly woman entered the room and placed a bouquet of white flowers on Henry's chest. In the centre was a single red rose. Twain spent the rest of his life obsessed with what he called mental telegraphy. He knew the universe had spoken to him. He just wished, with all his heart, that he hadn't heard it. So, are your nightmares warnings? The honest, scientific, and logical answer is mostly no. Mostly, your dreams are the exhaust fumes of your day. They are your anxieties about work, your fear of failure, the spicy food you ate for dinner, the random firing of a brain organizing its files. They are not grand prophecies. They are simply nocturnal housekeeping. But sometimes they are the red rose on the chest of a dead brother. Sometimes they are the black mountain falling on the school. Sometimes they are the Christmas presents floating in the river. We are small, rational creatures trapped in a rigidly linear perception of time. We walk forward day by day, utterly blind to what lies ahead. But the universe we inhabit is vast, strange, and interconnected in ways we are only just beginning to understand with our quantum math and our sleep labs. The evidence, from the cold equations of the block universe to the mind-bending experiments of Daryl Bem, from the dusty archives of John Barker to the rituals of the ancient Greeks, suggests that we are not just passengers on the train of time, facing backward, seeing only where we have been. We are more like drivers on a foggy road at night. We can mostly see only the gauges on the dashboard and the immediate few feet ahead. But every now and then, the dense fog clears for a fleeting second. The headlights catch a reflection on a guardrail half a mile ahead. We see the sharp curve in the road before we reach it. Abraham Lincoln saw his funeral in the East Room. Mark Twain saw his brother's metal coffin. Errol Mai Jones saw the darkness over Pant Glass Junior School. They didn't stop it. They couldn't stop it. The tragedy and the profound curse of precognition is that it is rarely, if ever, actionable. It is a witness, not a weapon. It is the universe whispering the plot twist before you ever turn the page. But it tells us something profound and deeply unsettling about who we are. We are not isolated in the narrow sliver of the now. We are, in some deep, mysterious part of our being, sprawled across time. We are creatures of the Everywhen. So tonight, when you finally turn off the lights, when you close your eyes and drift into that dark, sacred temple of sleep, pay attention. If you see a black mountain, if you see a metal coffin, If you see the walls caving in, write it down, because you might just be remembering the future.